Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1727. So during the last episode, I talked to you about how I wanted to dive a little deeper into this subject of growth cycles in the economy, business cycles in the economy, and of course, by virtue of talking about these things, we're also talking about recessions in the economy, right? In doing that, this chart I was looking at the other day is entitled Pandemic Ends the Longest Growth Cycle in U.S. History. And again, that's not the largest growth cycle, but it is the longest. I think it's misleading because whenever you're coming off an extreme bottom, it is going to look like that cycle is more pronounced in either time or breadth than it should be. And that's exactly what's happening here. So they say June of 2009 to February 2020, and they're talking about a 128-month expansion growth cycle in the economy that only yielded a annual GDP growth rate, by the way, in real GDP, not nominal GDP, but real. I'm glad they made that distinction because that, of course, is adjusted for the totally fake, highly manipulated CPI numbers. But it's still, at least there's some adjustment, right? It's not enough adjustment because the numbers are so understated. How could you ever adjust enough when you're dealing with highly manipulated index to start with? But, that notwithstanding, heck, it's better than just nominal, right? So I talked about on the last episode on Monday how that really wasn't that meaningful because I would have moved that point up to maybe sometime in 2012. And that's when I would have started the expansionary cycle because that was a more level place to start it, right? It was a more reasonable place to start it rather than at the darkest moments of the biggest economic contraction in over 7 decades, right? So better place to start somewhere in 2012. And when Trump was running for office and when Trump was elected, I talked about how, well, hey, is the business cycle going to end? Well, I didn't really think it started in 2009. I thought we had a few years to go, and et cetera, and we all know the story and we know what happened, right? It was a huge economic expansion under Trump, and that's not a political statement, it's just an actual fact. That said, though, let's just overall understand that the whole economy is a house of cards. It's a shell game. It's smoke and mirrors, right? It's whatever you want to call it. It's an illusion. Hey, remember that great song by Styx, The Grand Illusion? And I think that was the title of their album. That's such a good song. Wow, really good stuff. Some old classic music there for you, folks. Classic music. The Grand Illusion. Welcome to, how'd it go? Welcome to The Grand Illusion. Come on in and see what's happening. Pay the price. Get your tickets for the show. Oh, such a good song. Such good lyrics, too. Boy, I gotta look that one up. I gotta think about that one again. Do you like song lyrics? I really love song lyrics. That's a big part of how valuable the music is, at least to me, is how good the lyrics are. Great lyrics make for great music, whether it be everything from John Denver to Rush and everything in between. And I know those are not exactly considered in the same category, but I love them both. Love John Denver and I love Rush, the most talented band to ever walk the face of the earth, with lyrical excursions into philosophy and poetry and mythology and history. Wow, it's good stuff. Check it out. Okay, so that was that big growth cycle, 128 months. But looking back at some other cycles, now these are not in chronological order, they're in order of how long they lasted. So March of 1991 to March of 2001. That's a 10-year cycle, 120 months, yielding a 3.6% real GDP growth rate on an annual basis, right? That's pretty amazing. So what happened? Well, I'm about to tell you. And, I kind of pride myself on having some new ways to look at things, some original thoughts, viewing things the way most people maybe aren't looking at them. And hopefully, if I've accomplished my mission here, getting you to think in new ways. Okay, so let's see if I can do it. So that was mostly the Clinton era in the 90s, right? We had 8 years of Slick Willie. I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Yeah, right, Bill. Sure, we believe that. Which, by the way, it's not that big a deal. It's just that he was such a sleazy liar about it, right? And heck, there was a bit more of an age difference than maybe there should have been, but whatever, whatever. And frankly, you'd think he could have done better being the president and the most powerful person in the world. But hey, notwithstanding all my comic remarks, right? Notwithstanding my comedy. Sorry, Monica. Didn't mean anything. But, that was a really moving thing when Monica went on, was it on Oprah like a few years ago? I really felt bad for her. I mean, that didn't work out too well, unfortunately. How does someone like that ever have even a semi-normal life, right? It's just so unfair. Bill can go on, right? But it's not the same for her, and she wasn't the president, right? So anyway, it is what it is. Okay, so that expansion I would largely attribute to the beginning of that decade. And I know you're going to say, Jason, really? You think this was the thing that created an economic boom? Yeah, actually I do. It was significant, and nobody gives it credit. The humble fax machine. Yep, you heard that right. The humble fax machine. In its day, the fax machine was revolutionary. Now, granted, the fax machine was actually invented decades earlier than when it came into actual use, but it was an amazing advancement because I am old enough to remember life pre-fax machine. Let me see. I'll call that BF, before fax. Okay? BF, before fax. And I remember what life was like back then. Oh, I'll tell you something. You want to hear something? So I was giving a speech when I was a young, cocky kid because I was making a ton of money selling traditional real estate for RE/MAX. And everybody, all my fellow colleagues, realtors, all my realitator colleagues, they couldn't believe it. They thought, who is this whippersnapper running circles around us? He must be pulling a fast one. He's got to be reducing his commission and taking listings for no money. Otherwise, who would list with this kid? Right? That's what they said. But they were wrong. I hardly ever cut a deal. I demanded my fees as much as I could get them, right? And negotiated well. And I did tons of business. So I remember I was giving a speech once at a very young age at the Irvine Association of Realtors, and the president of the Irvine Association of Realtors, bless her heart, Doreen Benton, the old guard, right, actually interrupted my speech when I was talking about how to be more efficient as a realtor. I was saying, use the fax machine and fax the offer on the property to the listing agent. And she said, "Oh my God, you can't do that. You have to go over to the house and sit down with the seller and twist their arm to accept the offer. I can't believe you would just fax the offer over. That's blasphemy." Well, all you had to do was wait a couple of years and everybody was doing it. It's just that Jason Hartman was ahead of the curve, as usual. Right? And then, not only that, then email came along, and you would actually email the offer to the listing agent. Blasphemy! You couldn't do that. You had to go over and meet with them and schedule an appointment and sit down with them on the kitchen table. Well, not on the table, but at the table. And have a glass of water and tell them all about your buyers and why they were so great and why they should accept your extremely low offer. Boy, I tell you, in the old days, there were some great scenes when, like I remember one time I was the listing agent on this property for these wonderful clients I had, Paul and Carol. They were the most wonderful people. Anyway, a buyer's agent came over, presented an offer. His name was Brian, and I'll just never forget. And Paul was the kindest, coolest guy, but he got so angry at the low offer being presented by Brian. He just was so upset by it, and I don't blame him. Why would you want to have to sit down and meet with this guy and do all this? Yeah, send over the offer. You're not going to con us into it by sitting down with us, right? So anyway, that's the old days. But yes, that was blasphemy to use the fax machine. But the fax machine spurred a lot of economic growth in the 90s. And then, of course, the internet. Well, let's call it what it was called in the early days. It was called the Information Superhighway. Yes, the Information Superhighway. Not the internet, the Information Superhighway. And that was a game changer for world trade, but not only world trade, just non-local trade. I mean, nowadays we think nothing of doing business with people in other states, other countries. But let me tell you, back then, that was like a big deal. Oh my God, I gotta make a long-distance call? Are you kidding? How does that work? Do I have to dial 1 in the area code? Yeah, that's what you have to do. Yeah. It's a new world, folks. We seldom appreciate and remember what it used to be like. So that 10-year expansion, largely attributed to the fax machine and the internet. Okay, I think most people will agree with me, the internet, but very few give credit to the humble fax machine. And I got to tell you, it was a big deal in its day. Also, and I'm going to give good old Slick Willie Bill Clinton, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I'm going to give him some credit here, big-time credit, okay? As much of a crooked group that was, right, especially the misses, he kind of stayed out of the way, right? He didn't interfere too much in the economy as maybe most left-wing Democrat presidents would have. I give Clinton some real credit for that. Okay, let's see here. Let's go way back in time. Let's go back to the good old 50s. May 1954 to August of 1957, 39 months straight of economic expansion at an average annual rate. And by the way, I would venture to say this was before things were so manipulated like they are today, of 4%. That's a big deal. 4%. Now, what was going on then? Well, actually, to know what was going on then, we're going to revisit a period before that. Let's go October of 1949 to July of 1953. 45 months, 45 consecutive months of expansion. And this one's going to blow your mind. You ready for this? Annual real, meaning adjusted for not so manipulated inflation back then, growth rate, GDP growth of 6.9%. That was the most prosperous time for America, the post-World War II baby boomers. Of course, a lot of men lost their lives, or they were maimed, they lost limbs in the awful hellhole that is war, right? But the ones who lived came back from World War II and they built a great country. So the next time you say, hey, baby boomer, right? Well, actually, sorry, I'm a little off on that. I can't give credit to the baby boomers because they were just being born. Okay, so they don't get credit. They were just babies. But their parents, the silent generation, pretty awesome generation of people, no question about it. They made a lot of sacrifices. They went through the Great Depression. Got to give them huge credit. But you got to give the baby boomers a lot of credit too. I mean, look at all the great stuff that happened under baby boomers. The space race, the major technological advancements, commercial air travel, the 747, baby boomers, they did some pretty amazing stuff in their day. The Concorde. Now, granted, some of that was the silent generation too, so, it was a mix, right? I get it. But the baby boomers weren't all as lame as people try to portray them to be. Baby boomers deserve a lot of credit for what we have now. Yeah, I know they got a little complacent because, look, there was all this prosperity. Everybody gets complacent when there's prosperity. Luxury is the lull to apathy. But go online and look on YouTube and look up David Hoffman's channel and watch some of those old videos of interviewing people from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and, just these candid interviews. See what they thought, how they felt, what they thought the future would be like. This was a very prosperous time, the late 40s into the 50s. And that was when Eisenhower really got behind the interstate highway system. I mean, that was the fax machine of the day, right? That was the internet of the day, connecting the country. It was amazing, right? It was totally incredible what was accomplished back then. And of course, that was the American love affair with the automobile. I mean, it was incredible. It was an incredible, incredible time. I wasn't alive to enjoy it, but it looks pretty awesome. Now, granted, not everything was perfect. There were certainly a lot of problems too, and society was very different back then. But economically speaking, it was a pretty amazing time. Okay, so that's all we have time to talk about today because we got to get to a little more Q&A stuff. But at least going over those expansions and understanding the Austrian economics concept of the business cycle. That's why I want to really talk to you about that, the business cycle. And we've talked about it a lot before on prior episodes, but this is really what this is saying. How long can you go before you hit a recession? Until recently, I mean, Australia's become a prison camp, basically, with COVID-1984. But before that, I mean, Australia has just somehow avoided recession for so much longer than maybe any other economy ever. I'm not sure, but I think it's been like 3 decades since they've had a real economic downturn. Truly an amazing economy. Japan, the complete opposite, right? Totally the opposite. I mean, they've been in a downturn for about 3 decades. There's a lot of factors that go into all of these things, of course, but just understanding and recognizing the business cycles and the expansion cycles can really help us better manage our real estate portfolios and our finances in general. And we are in a time of very significant wealth transfer right now, and a time where we really need to be on guard because, well, as you know from all of the stuff we always talk about on this show, there's a lot to be very wary of. So we'll talk about all that stuff more as we continue, but let's switch over to some Q&A stuff. Of course, be sure to get your tickets for our upcoming live event, Empowered Investor Live, in Orlando, September 10th, 11th, and 12th. It's going to be a great time. We've got a property tour to kick that off on Friday the 10th, then the conference all day Saturday and Sunday, and it's just going to be a really fun time. A lot of great networking, a lot of great learning, and I think you'll really enjoy it. And go to empoweredinvestor.com, empoweredinvestor.com, to get your tickets for that at early bird prices. Okay, let's switch over and do a little bit of Q&A.
All right, number 3 here. What are your thoughts on a B minus versus B plus versus an A minus property? That's, I guess, from 61,000 to $240,000 properties, these middle class, cheap incomes houses. You see a distinguishing difference between, say, a B minus and an A minus? Is there something that is there a line there?
Look, I mean, a lot
Seems
of
like
things
that's
are
passing
a
to
bit of
me.
a judgment call.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no textbook definition for A minus versus B plus exactly, right?
Right.
These are kind of like a perception, okay? Like you either get the car with a sunroof or you don't, okay?
It's not binary. It's not so binary as we
It's
like
not
to
that
think.
binary, exactly.
Yeah.
So, not much difference. But look, the rule is for the money you're spending with good rent to value ratios, of course, get the best properties you can, but don't expect it to be as good as an area that you would want to live in. I remember one real estate teacher many years ago when I was probably, I don't know, 19 years old, going to real estate seminars years ago. He said to me, if you're in a neighborhood and you're looking at rental properties and you see someone jogging, get out. That area is too nice.
It's too nice to own a house.
You want the more working class neighborhoods, workforce housing, the upper end of that.
It's shelter, yeah.
The upper end of that. But you don't want, you do want it, but it's never going to make sense rent to value ratio wise. A yuppie neighborhood, right? Yeah. A bunch of upwardly mobile professionals, those properties are going to be too expensive to make sense. Okay.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Number 4 here. Also, thoughts on new versus old construction properties in this environment with lumber prices decreasing for now. Will falling lumber prices decrease the purchase price of a new home, or will construction companies ignore the decrease and charge us the higher cost regardless to recoup past lost profit margins, or will the market continue to support higher construction costs?
Well, I don't think it's really about recouping lost profits on past deals where the builder didn't have escalation clauses in their agreements and so forth, and they weren't able to pass that price along to borrowers or to buyers. Mm-hmm. But what it really is, Gene, is that if you look at the PPI, the producer price index, okay, which is a sort of a good barometer of inflationary pressures because that's before it gets to a final product, right? And so they're looking at components, commodities, and not at final products. They're not looking at the consumer price index. The PPI is what people are actually buying with their money, right? They're looking at the supply chain in that sense. Okay. Prices tend to be very sticky where they are. So even with lumber prices coming down and there being some relief to the crazy lumber prices we saw a couple of months ago, you're not likely to see builders just start passing these savings along to buyers.
Yeah, wouldn't think
number one, because why should they? They don't have to. The market is still very strong, even though it is slightly cooling, but it's so slight. It's too early to make it a trend yet.
Okay? Yeah.
So we'll see. There's still a massive housing shortage. And, buyers are taking a little bit of a breather. It's not as nuts as it was a few months ago. That's for sure.
Got it. Okay. And then number 5 here says, this is in reference to George's whiteboard on Zoltan's deflationary prediction with regards to income property. Okay. So he's got a scenario here. It says, if banks will not make mortgage loans to retail investors like Freddie or Fannie, we'll see Freddie Mac investment loan restrictions and Wells Fargo cancels personal lines of credit. Yeah, sure. The corporate and foreign entities will be able to buy more income properties in cash with less competition from the mom and pops. Then rental income properties will fall in price, allowing these corporate and foreign entities with additional cash reserves to buy at a discount. We the people own nothing and we'll be happy scenario. Yeah. So with that kind of scenario in mind, where it seems like the financial sector is locking up liquidity from a loan perspective, allowing institutions to come in and just basically buy everything at cash. Should I get my equity out of my primary residence to go into rental income now before it's too late? What do you think about that? What do you think somebody who sees this kind of scenario writing on the wall is like, should he equity strip now and maybe get into some rentals? This is a good time to do that.
You should always equity strip. I did a video on my YouTube channel a couple of years ago. It was basically the topic of when should you pay cash for a property? And, look at it. It doesn't have to be all cash, just meaning have a lot of equity versus having minimal equity in the property. The vast majority of the time, minimal equity, as much leverage as possible, super low interest rates, tax deductible interest, all the reasons I mentioned a few minutes ago, inflation-induced debt destruction, et cetera. But if you are just sitting on a ton of cash and you're finding it hard to deploy, and like me, okay, I feel like I'm long on everything, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Shouldn't I be shorting something? Like literally the only thing I'm shorting is the US dollar through my mortgage debt. And that's a short, and that's great. But I'm long on the S&P, I'm long on real estate, I'm long on Bitcoin, I'm long on everything, right?
Yeah.
I'm long on gold, whatever. I mean, I'm really a real estate guy, so I'm not going to be as, I dabble in a few other things, but, real estate's my thing, right? So if you are in a state for your own personal residence that has really good homestead exemptions, good homestead protection, which means protection from potential creditors, lawsuits, litigation. You never know what can happen. Maybe an insurance policy you have falls short of coverage or they won't cover something. I mean, everybody's probably going to face this at least one, if not several times in their life, some kind of liability like that from a creditor. Texas and Florida, for example, very good homestead laws. It's not a terrible thing to just park some cash in your personal residence.
Yeah.
It's not great. I'm just saying it's better than keeping it in the bank because at least you'll have homestead protection. Okay?
Yeah, good point. Good point.
But if you're in California, for example, I mean, last I checked, and this may well have been updated, but it's probably not significant. They only had like $75,000 in homestead protection, whereas in Texas or Florida, you can have unlimited amounts. I think Texas is $1 million. I think Florida is unlimited, actually. Now, there are some rules around that, some details to it. But if you remember the infamous, I should say, OJ case, right? When Daniel Petrocelli, the lawyer, I think that was Ron Goldman's lawyer for the Goldman family, they got that $33 million judgment against OJ. Well, he rushed to Florida and bought an expensive house and just sunk cash into it.
Now, I see. Oh, okay. Clever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So listen, it's not the cleverest thing you can do. I'm just saying, if you got like tons of cash sitting around and you want to just stick some of it away, that's not bad. Just make sure you have a good insurance policy because remember, a sinkhole or a hurricane or a fire could wipe that out. Okay, so you got to have good insurance.
Good counterparty risk. Okay. Number 2, what does this mean for existing mortgages? Whether is a Lynette Zhang reset scenario call on debt, whether primary residence or rental income property to ensure beyond rental income having a roof over your head. What does that mean? So what does this mean for existing mortgages? You got it figured out?
I don't have it figured out, but I'm going to just speculate here a little bit. I was just on Lynette's show last week, and I replayed some of that interview on the podcast this week, just today, literally. So Lynette's philosophy, if I've got it right, and Lynette, pardon me if I'm getting this wrong, is basically have the mortgages on the properties, but have gold on the side that you can use to pay them off if needed. Now, I don't agree with that because why would you ever want to pay them off? Lynette she's of a different mind than I am, and, she's more debt averse and more worried about the Great Reset concept. So, who knows what could come out of it? I mean, anything is possible, of course, but I just think, have the big mortgages and don't pay them off.
Yeah, it makes more sense to me too. Once I realize property taxes are part of an equation that I can't get away from, I don't even own this place.
Gene, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Folks, what Gene said right there is really brilliant. You never own a property free and clear. In almost any place in the world, they have some sort of property tax, which represents a perpetual lien on the property. It is not possible to actually own a property free and clear because you have a property tax lien perpetually. And many times you have a homeowners association lien too.
Right. Okay? Yeah.
So you mortgage your properties. Okay.
It's that's the game you play. Once I had that perspective, I realized, okay, there's no point in paying anything off. It just doesn't make any sense. Number 3 here, if rental rates increase, won't that just keep pushing the rental income property prices? If the price of rent goes up, the price of the house go up as well.
Ultimately. I mean, what really happens though in the residential market is the prices always lead The prices go up first and the rents lag. It's always that way. Prices lead, rents lag, okay? So yes, if rents get better, that will tend to make properties look more attractive to investors. More investor money comes into the market, and that has the effect of pushing prices up. But all of these things are wonderful if you own the properties. So buy the properties, and let's hope that happens.
Yeah. With $275,000 available, trying to figure out a number of rental income properties and a mix that maximizes cash flow and portfolio, but also de-risk possible issues with like rent moratoriums, vacancy maintenance, etc., through property classification in inflationary, deflationary scenarios. Okay, so that's what he's trying to do. So he's got $275,000. He's trying to figure out how to best deploy that. I would definitely say stay out of blue states if you can. That would be my number one piece of advice right there from a guy who's got a handful of properties. Stay out of those.
Listen to Gene. He's giving
vultures.
Great advice there. Yeah,
they're vultures.
Absolutely.
And they're a pain in the ass too, man. They just don't stop hounding you with junk mail.
I know. It's unbelievable. So just to expand on that, Gene.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yep.
So you want to invest in landlord-friendly states, business-friendly states, places that are friendly to our cause as investors.
Our values.
These are the red states. Okay, they're the political environment tends to be conservative. They expect people to uphold their contracts. Imagine that. And if you get a bad tenant, you're going to have an easier time getting them out. So everything becomes more enforceable in a red state. Okay. Yeah. So that's a better market in which to invest for sure. So remember, when you buy properties or you invest in anything, you have various risks, right? You have counterparty risk, you have this and that, but you also have political risk.
Yeah.
Okay. So
seems to be it's the biggest one, I think, right now for me is that political risk. It's just like
right now, you're right. In the time we are living in absolutely crazy times right now. So political risk is very legit. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.